Hi everyone, it's Miss Danner. We are going to begin Chapter 6 in this video. So if you will please get your Chapter 6 objectives out as well as your Chapter 6 notes. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about how cells harvest chemical energy. So we are going to discuss cellular respiration, and we're going to compare it to photosynthesis. Now, Chapter 7, we're going to talk about photosynthesis. So we're going to first talk about how the cells get energy. So just sort of as an introduction, and also if you are looking in your textbook, which you should be, the very first introduction talks about, it shows a newborn baby, just born. It talks about brown fat and how it burns fuel and produces heat. So oxygen is a requirement for cell respiration. It is a reactant, so we have to have oxygen in order for any of this to take place. And in this process of cell respiration, we're going to break down sugar and other foods, and we're going to generate ATP, which is the energy molecule in our cells, as well as heat. Okay, because we learned in the previous chapter that all chemical reactions are going to lose some heat. Now, brown fat cells have what we call a short circuit in their respiration. They only generate heat. There's no ATP generated there. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about the stages of cell respiration and how certain cells produce ATP when they've got oxygen present. Okay, and you can see, of course, a little baby. This is one reason why babies have to be wrapped up in blankets, even in the summertime, because they only have brown fat and they lose a lot of heat, and they're a lot smaller. So they have a different type of fat than children and adults have. All right, so just some of the big ideas. We're going to talk about cell respiration, the stages, and at the end of the chapter, we're going to talk about fermentation and what happens during fermentation, and then we'll kind of connect all these pathways at the very end. So, cell respiration is an aerobic harvest of energy. Y'all, you need to know that that word aerobic simply means with air, with oxygen. Okay, so keep that in mind. So, again, we're looking at objective number 1, which says compare the processes and locations of cell respiration and photosynthesis. So both of these, photosynthesis and cell respiration, provide energy for life. And we know life requires energy. All ecosystems, that energy ultimately comes from the sun. Okay, now in photosynthesis, the energy of the sun is used to rearrange atoms of carbon dioxide and water, and it's going to produce organic molecules, which is glucose, which is food for the plant, and it's going to release oxygen. Okay, so photosynthesis is going to take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and it's going to rearrange those and turn it into organic molecules of glucose and oxygen. Okay, now this takes place in chloroplast. Okay, there's a special organelle called chloroplast where photosynthesis takes place. And it's not in every cell. It's going to be in plants, algae, and some prokaryotes. You'll notice we are missing from that list. We, animals, which are eukaryotes, we don't do photosynthesis. Therefore, we don't have chloroplast. Okay, now, in cell respiration, oxygen is consumed as organic molecules are broken down to produce CO2 and water, and the cells capture the energy and release it as ATP. So, y'all, the products of photosynthesis, okay, all right, let's look right here. The products of photosynthesis were organic molecules, which is glucose, and oxygen, okay? Oxygen is consumed as organic molecules, which is glucose. They are the reactants for cell respiration. Cell respiration is going to break down and produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So these chemical reactions, these chemical equations, they're opposites of each other. Photosynthesis uses sun energy, CO2, and water to make glucose and oxygen, whereas cell respiration uses glucose and oxygen to make CO2, water, and release energy. Okay, so they're they're total opposites of each other. Now, cell respiration takes place in the mitochondria, and pretty much all cells do cell respiration. There are very few prokaryotes that don't do cell respiration. Most all cells are going to have mitochondria, which is where cell respiration takes place. So it says, what is misleading about this statement? Plant cells perform photosynthesis and animal cells perform cell respiration. Well, plant cells do perform photosynthesis, but they also do cell respiration. So animals are not the only ones that do cell respiration. Okay, all cells perform cell respiration. So right here, this is just kind of showing you the ecosystem. This is on page 114 in your textbook, but it shows ultimately all energy comes from the sun, so there's sunlight. The chloroplasts in photosynthesis are going to capture that sunlight, and they're going to use CO2 and water, and they're going to produce organic molecules as glucose and oxygen. Whereas mitochondria are going to use glucose and oxygen, and they're going to break down and produce CO2 and water, okay, which again, chloroplasts would use. Now, in this process, energy comes in, but ATP is produced from cell respiration, and ATP powers all of the cell's work. And then, of course, you also see that we release some heat energy as well, okay? Now, moving to objective number 2 says, explain how breathing and cell respiration are related. So respiration is often used as a synonym for breathing, and it refers to exchanging gases. So you guys know that organisms get oxygen from the environment. So we breathe it in from our environment, and we breathe out CO2 as a waste product. So breathing and cell respiration are very closely related, all right? Because, say, for animals example, we've got to have oxygen to do respiration. The only way we get oxygen is by breathing in, okay? Well, cell respiration produces CO2 as a waste. Therefore, we have to get rid of that. We breathe it out to get rid of that waste from the cells, okay? So that's interesting to show that relationship. If you look on 114, it shows how these two are related. And your checkpoint question is really interesting. It says, are the oxygen atoms a runner exhales the same oxygen atoms that she inhaled from the environment? And the answer to that question is no. The oxygen that she inhaled becomes part of water, and that could actually become part of the runner's urine. The oxygen atoms in exhaled CO2 are the ones that originate from glucose. So the oxygen that she breathes out are not the same ones that she breathed in. All right, so that's kind of an interesting way to look at that. Now, you can see our runner here, and so she's breathing heavy. If you're running, you're usually breathing heavy. So oxygen's coming in. That oxygen comes in the lungs, where the blood is going to surround the lungs. It is transported in the bloodstream to all the muscle cells that are carrying out cell respiration. So that, right, we use glucose, which is why we eat, that's sugar, and then she just got the oxygen from breathing in, and we're going to produce CO2, water, and ATP. The ATP is going to allow for her muscles to continue contracting so she can keep running. Water, of course, is always used by the cell, but now this CO2 right here, CO2, the blood is going to transport it back to the lungs, and we're going to breathe that CO2 out, all right? This is an excellent image explaining breathing and how it's related to cellular respiration. It's on page 114. This is also something we talk a lot about in your anatomy courses for those of you that are going to go on and take anatomy. All right, again, excellent graphic there. We just talked about, what that is. It also gives you the equation, which we're about to get to in just a second. So if you look at objective number 3, it says, provide the overall chemical equation for cell respiration, identify reactants and products. So that's where we're going now. So cell respiration is an exergonic, which means energy releasing process, and it transforms energy from glucose to make ATP. It captures about 34% of the available energy originally stored in glucose, with the rest of the energy lost as heat. So that's our energy yield, is what we would say. We use about 34% of the energy in glucose. The rest of that is lost as heat, all right? And that's the same checkpoint question, so we'll move on. Now, this is the objective for number 2. You've got to know this chemical equation, and you got to know it well, all right? The reactants are on the left side of the arrow, so you have 2 reactants for cell respiration. You have glucose and we have oxygen. That is the chemical formula for glucose, C6H12O6, and then O2 is the chemical formula for oxygen. So when we take these reactants and we go through all the different stages of cell respiration, we're going to end up with 3 products. Carbon dioxide, which is CO2, water, which is H2O, ATP, and heat. Okay, ATP, of course, is what we need to power the work of cells. So this is objective number 3. It gives you your overall equation. It labels your reactants. It also labels your products. Okay, now, just a connection. The human body has to use energy from ATP for everything. Your body requires a continuous supply of energy. It's all, even when you're asleep, your cells are working, they've got to have energy. Cell respiration is what provides that energy for us to maintain all of our activities. Now, that balance of taking in energy and spending energy, that's how it is a delicate balance to maintain a healthy body weight, all right? This is just interesting. This is on page 115, and it's showing you various activities and how many calories they burn. I'm sure you have heard of calories, how many calories you intake a day. And this is showing you, this is average for about a 150-pound person, so, give or take, depending on what your weight is. But this is how many calories you burn, okay, per hour. So if you sit and write for an hour, you're going to burn about 28 calories. Driving a car, dancing slowly, 200. Obviously, running for an hour is going to burn the most calories with almost 1,000, okay? All right, so moving on to number 4, objective number 4 says explain how redox reactions are used in cell respiration. Define oxidation and reduction. So how do your cells get energy from fuel? Like, we know we have to eat, we get that, but how do we do that? Well, it involves transferring electrons from one thing to another in reactions. So electrons are removed from fuel, all right? This is called oxidation. Oxidation means you lose an electron, or it's removed. They are transferred to NAD, okay? NAD is an electron carrier, all right? When it picks up an electron, it becomes NADH. But when NAD picks up an electron, that's called reduction. Reduction means you gain an electron. You're thinking, Miss Danner, you got that backwards. Reduction means reduce. Well, why are we gaining an electron? Y'all remember, electrons carry a negative charge. So when we gain an electron, we actually have a negative charge, which is where the term reduction comes in. So oxidation, we gain an electron. Oxidation, we lose an electron because we're giving off that negative, all right? We're losing it. And then reduction is when we are accepting an electron, and we're, of course, we're gaining it, but we're taking on a negative charge. So again, NAD is really important. It's an electron carrier. It's the little, I tell people to think of them as little taxi cabs. It's going to pick up these electrons and carry them from one step to the next step. When an NAD plus picks up an electron, it's now called NADH, okay? Now, NADH is going to pass those electrons to an electron transport chain. Now, this electrons fall from one carrier to the next, and finally they fall to oxygen, and the energy is released. So that we'll get into that a little bit later, after we kind of talk about the steps. But that's the definitions of oxidation and reduction and how redox are used in cell respiration. Redox reactions are used in respiration because the only way to get the energy from the fuel is to move and transfer electrons around to different atoms, and that is what redox reactions do. Redox reaction involves both oxidation and reduction, which is why we join the RED and the OX to get that redox. Okay, now, again, NAD, if you look at number 5 objective, it describe the general roles of NAD and SAD in cell respiration. Well, they're both really important electron carriers. NAD is an important coenzyme. It accepts electrons and becomes reduced to NADH. It's a really important player when we're oxidizing glucose. And again, oxidizing means we're giving off electrons. And then when NAD accepts those, which is reduction, it becomes NADH. Now, SAD is just sort of like NAD's cousin. He's kind of there along for the ride. just another important electron carrier, and we talk about this in both respiration and photosynthesis. So these are important electron carriers, you know, for both of these. All right, so we are going to stop there right here. Oh, no, we're not. We're going to finish this. Sorry. This is showing going back to that, the chemical reaction for cell respiration. Again, you start with glucose, C6H12O6, plus oxygen. Now, glucose is going to become oxidized. It's going to lose hydrogen electrons. Hydrogen atoms are electrons, negatively charged. It's going to lose them, and glucose actually becomes carbon dioxide. Okay, so look, C6H12O6. If we lose these hydrogens, we're only left with carbon and oxygen. Okay, so that's why we have 6 CO2s over here. So glucose is oxidized and becomes carbon dioxide, whereas oxygen is going to gain those hydrogen electrons that glucose gave off. Oxygen is going to pick them up and become reduced to water. Okay, this is excellent in explaining those redox reactions. Glucose loses hydrogens, becomes oxidized to carbon dioxide. Okay, again, we gave those H's away. Oxygen is going to pick up some of those H's. It's going to gain them and become reduced to water. Because when you take oxygen and you put it with hydrogen, you're going to get water. Okay, so this is that redox reaction and how we transfer electrons around in this chemical reaction so that we can take glucose and turn it into a usable ATP for the cell. Okay, right here, organic fuel, oxidized fuel, and oxidation. There's an enzyme called dehydrogenase that's going to catalyze this reaction. NAD is going to pick up hydrogens, and it's going to be a reduction. All right, so you can see how that works. And this is also in your textbook. Both of these are on page 116. This reaction is on the bottom, and then this image is on the top of the page. All right, this is showing you the electron transport chain, which is the bottom of page 116. So NAD, all right, NADH, they're going to bring those electrons, they're going to bring them to the top of the, looks like a staircase. They're going to bring them to the top of the stairs, and as those electrons bounce down each stair, they're going to give off ATP. It's a controlled release of ATP, so that the cell can, of course, use this energy. Now, when this electron gets to the very end, oxygen's going to pick it up, and that's what gives us water, all right? Okay, we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up with the stages of respiration in the next video.